Welcome to everybody who is here today. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jan Kraus, and Nina Silver and I are co-facilitating the Artist Voices program today. And on behalf of the Women's Art Association of Canada, I welcome everybody here, whether you are a first-timer visitor or you've been here multiple times. And for those of you who are visitors, please take time, or we invite you to take time to check out the Women's Art Association website. Lots of information there about all kinds of things that we offer at through WAC, which is the way we pronounce the acronym. Just a reminder for those who have joined on, today's presentation is being recorded and it will be sent out in the next day or two to everybody who registered. It'll be available for the next 7 days, and don't hesitate to sign up, even though you know or think that you might not be able to be present or come in late. You can always catch it later. I think everybody has muted their mics now. Just a reminder to do that if you haven't. And during Jasmine's presentation, type any questions or comments you have into the chat box, and Nina, our tech wizard, is going to be keeping track of those, and she will facilitate the Q&A at the end. I know that some of you know that I normally do the land acknowledgement, but I'm going to postpone that and allow Jasmine to do it today. Allow, that's not quite the right word I should have used, but again, to help us think about our land acknowledgement and pay attention to what we're saying. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Jasmine Vanstone, multidisciplinary artist and arts facilitator, who will share with us how ingredients, ancestral knowledge, and found materials can become portals for collage, research-based art, and cultural reflection. I really look forward to that last part especially. Through personal stories and sensory insights, she invites us to consider our own relationships to our own lineage, our intuitive creativity, and to pay attention to how everyday objects hold meaning for us. Even as an emerging artist, Jasmine has become very well known for her community building art projects. That was pointed out to me several times, Jasmine. It's also very obvious on your website. And if you haven't had an opportunity yet to check out Jasmine's website, I highly encourage you to do that. And she's got an excellent Instagram account too. So thank you, Jasmine, so much for making time to share with us today and lead us through recipes for remembering.
Thank you so much, Jen, for the intro. And yes, so the title is Recipes for Remembering, looking at collage culture and the alchemy of materials. And for this land acknowledgement, in this ritual space, I speak to you from Toronto on the sacred lands of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, under the dish with one spoon wampum, a treaty that calls us to share the land with respect, care, and accountability. And I also wish to acknowledge the ancestors who come to Turtle Island involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Many of us in the diaspora are navigating our own histories of forced displacement and ancestral survival that hold space in our bodies and in our blood. And so with that, I honor the stewards of this land whose food systems, ecological knowledge, and communal practices have long sustained this territory. So today, through art and conversation, we bring together our fragmented stories to piece together new futures. And I acknowledge that my own liberation is tied to Indigenous and Black sovereignty, and invite you all to commit to learning from the land and its caretakers as we reclaim our cultural traditions and be in right relation with each other. So let this space be a pot we gather around with gratitude, intention, and shared imagination. So before I get deep into the woods or weeds, whatever phrase that you like to use, nerding out about my passions, I wanted to share more about the why and introduce myself more as a human. So, why this talk is titled Recipes of Remembering is because I'm a born again foodie who grew through tough relationships with food and now can appreciate and value all the stories, love, and relationships it has provided me. And I break bread with you now and invite you to ingest and reflect the stories, ponderings, and invitations I share with you. Um, Also, my education in cultural artistic practice for social and environmental justice. It was a lot. I couldn't fit it all on one slide. Um, Alongside my cultural background as a Jamaican Canadian artist, deeply informs the external shape of my work and it influences the themes I return to, which are culture, land, food, memory, migration, community care, and also the materials we inherit or gather along the way. So I mentioned my education background reflects my external practice, but internally, my neurodivergence and my need for multiplicity shape how I move through ideas, mediums, and roles as well. And I'm drawn to alchemy, transfusion, layering, remixing, and transformation because my mind is often making connections between many, many, many things all at once. And that is also part of why multidisciplinary artistic practice feels so alive to me and why I am increasingly interested in interdisciplinary work, where visual art, poetry, research, sound, food, and storytelling can all meet together. And so I put my Instagram on some of the slides, not all of the slides. So you have a chance to check out my website and my Instagram after you see the recording or after if you're in person today. Um, so now moving into about my work. Let's see. Collage has become definitely a grounding base for my multidisciplinary practice. I think collage is often overlooked or reduced to the act of just layering paper. It's seen more as a craft. But for me personally, collage is a way of seeing the world. It's about noticing the stories inside fragments and finding ways for them to speak to each other. I think collage is the best way to describe my brain, honestly. And when I close my eyes to focus on a single image, it's pitch dark. And I have aphantasia. So for folks who have the blessed skill of closing their eyes and seeing an apple, I do not have that. And the image, no matter how much I close and focus, it doesn't come through. But as soon as I conceptually notice a connection between two things, then that dotted line becomes so interesting that I can zoom into its details. And then, I guess visually speaking, my thoughts become fractals and never-ending storylines, and it takes a calm moment to hone back in on the initial spark, but appreciate the simple complexity of two ideas or two entities coming together. So I only imagine if collage was how everyone saw the world, like two things that don't initially make sense come together over appreciation that they can coexist in the same place. And I see that as a powerful tool, and this is why I have so much joy for collage. And in that way, collage feels connected to the passing down of family recipes. So recipes are rarely static. When We write them down sometimes as, different palettes come. You scratch out, you adjust your salt to taste, you adjust all your ingredients to taste. And they shift as well through migration, memory, access, substitution also, depending on where you're migrating to, survival and care. And you adapt to the ingredients that you have. You remember also maybe what someone taught you or what someone told you in passing, and you make adjustments by instinct. You taste, you respond, and you make it come together through spirit or through the act of cooking. And that's how I understand my art practice. I'm gathering these fragments, so like these materials, these memories, these pieces of research, inherited knowledge, personal experience as well, just living at my intersections, and asking what they can become when placed in relationship with each other. So before I talk about my projects, it's really important for me to highlight the process and how fragments can become language, how materials can become memory, and how collage also becomes a way to honor what has been carried, adapted, and transformed. So off to the next slide. So this is looking at the concept of the talk. So I was thinking at length of what to talk about, how to title it. Titling is actually really hard in my artistic practice because I lean so much into intuition. So I thought it would be interesting to frame my talk as recipes of remembering, to focus on, of course, collage, culture, and alchemy of materials. And one part of that is materials do not simply represent a memory, they change the memory that they carry. So, for example, a photograph, a recipe card, um, even, well, in Caribbean families, there's a spice tin that holds important information sometimes. Things are repurposed. Or even a scrap of paper can hold meaning in everyday life. But when it enters an artwork, then it becomes something new and starts to remix the memory and carry new associations with it. So with the artwork, the work transforms as it moves between hand to image, image transferred onto objects, or voices into recorded sounds, and also just the act of gathering together. And one thing that I keep thinking about is what happens when a memory can be tangible, or rather, what happens to a memory when there is no tangible component to the experience. So one thing was that understanding materials already arrive with memory. A material is never just a material alone. It could, for example, with collage and paper-based art, it might carry handwriting of a person that you hold dear, residue from being in contact with something, age because it hasn't been cared for, or texture also because it might not have been cared for or it has been adapted to evoke more memory. Another thing is a tin might carry a scent, and with your olfactory nerve, scents are really great for triggering memories, but also sounds. And so when materials in more specificity enter collage, their meaning expands because I'm able to place materials beside each other and ask what happens when these different histories touch. For example, a family photo beside handmade paper, or a recipe beside a symbolic ingredient, a found object that has been etched with poetic words. The material starts to speak differently because of its relationship to the other pieces. And this transformation can change the memory as well. So when I cut, layer, scan, print, glue, stain, all these other verbs that I tend to do in my arts practice, I'm changing how the memory is held. And the original memory is still there, but it becomes reinterpreted. And in doing that, it becomes an active memory. And I just wanted to share before going into more visual slides that this connects to Caribbean food culture. So a recipe changes depending on where you are, what ingredients you can access, who taught you, what you have to substitute. The memory of the dish survives, but it adapts. Materials in my work also behave similarly because they carry lineage, but they also respond to environment, access, and intuition. Now we got the pictures. So with this is the first project I was thinking of when looking at the alchemy of materials because this is an interactive installation that explores how food carries cultural history and connects to generations. So, as a Jamaican Canadian eldest daughter, I share traces of my Caribbean identity through sculptural and collage works inspired by family traditions and cultural recipes. So, this project reflects a journey of curiosity, exploration, and understanding of how food shapes my personal identity and memories of belonging. And when I say multidisciplinary, this installation sure does have quite a bit. So there's 9 mediums identified, which are all listed right under that title. And I wanted to create as many tactile items as possible to evoke the idea of cooking from scratch. So, ceramics as a vessel undergoes a transformative process that connects land to hand, much like the farm to table concept. Paper mache is also similar. So, I recycled HelloFresh food delivery boxes and cereal boxes to transform them into a Dutch pot and a pineapple, effectively using cardboard food scraps in a nose to tail way of creating. And I have purposeful intention in every material selected in this exhibit. I wanted the tactility to evoke the kitchens of my upbringing, where staple canned goods and spices and Caribbean motifs were ever present. And on the wall in the back, you'll see that there's analog collages, and there's also with the text, those are lino block prints hand carved every one of the letters to print them onto the paper. And so those ones depict ingredients, family stories, and moments of connection through cooking traditions. So the physicality of the handmade works evoke the tactility of heritage. And also the color palette. I really love colors, and this red, gold, and green are Rasta colors, but having black, gold, and green as well. Black being more of like a supportive color, ties in my Jamaican heritage, as well as sourcing Grace Island sodas that have caps with idioms on the top of the lid. So folks were able to flip them over to read the idioms, and also this interactive installation. I found it most enjoyable because personally, the interactive component was more rewarding than having to share my personal history. So what I did was I created a book and made the first entry a memory of growing up and learning how to cook Caribbean food for the first time. And it isn't measured when communicated orally, so I had to share this initial frustration in learning without measuring, which turned into appreciation for finally getting it after many tries and many burnt pots, and building a relationship with each dish. And in the open drawer, which is the drawer underneath the book that that person is signing, um, I placed multiple copies of take-home recipe cards featuring the first 8 dishes I learned how to cook, but not using traditional forms of measurement to invite participants to take home a recipe to try, but also so that they can experience the frustration I had in learning cultural food. So that was fun. Folks actually came back and shared that they had fun trying out these recipes, especially if they haven't tasted them before. So you can see how this ties into alchemy and also memory. Having to have exposure to cultural foods or not having previous exposure affects how you interpret the ingredients. So this project and interactive response then invited me to expand and explore on my next project. And before I do that, I wanted to share this reflection. This is like a question that I keep thinking about for the last, I guess, 2.5, maybe 3 years, is how do recipes become archives and how do archives become living sensory works? So I want you to actually take time to think about this for yourself, and hopefully we have enough time, maybe during the Q&A, to talk about this a bit more. So, as a Jamaican Canadian eldest daughter to a Jamaican immigrant mother, I had cravings to learn more about my culture. And being mixed race and subconsciously critiquing cultural food access in Toronto in the early 2000s, I found I had cravings to learn how to cook and in turn learn Jamaican recipes. But before that, I guess subconscious awakening, I lived with my grandma in Jamaica for some time in my childhood. She noticed I was a picky eater, always flicking out the red kidney beans when I was eating rice and peas, but she always made the dishes exactly the same. And when I returned back to Toronto, I noticed the vast difference in quality of ingredients, among many other things, but I found what I was missing, and it turned into very intense food cravings for Jamaican dishes. So little me, probably 7 or 8, spent time in the kitchen with my mom learning how to make these dishes, to make rice and peas and cornmeal porridge as my first dishes. It was such a treat because now these memories are ingrained when I make them, but I wondered how, with these staple foods, how many other memories are ascribed to them? Like, how did they come to be? And also, how many hands recreated the same dish but taste slightly different because of the person who is conjuring the cultural alchemy? So, the interactive component of the previous project organically sparked my curiosity and my need to connect the dots and see the world as collage. And I then opened up to this other project. So with this project, became known as Dutch Pot in Diaspora, and it expanded the personal lens of the previous project into a person-to-person series of conversations that explore the rich connections between cultural heritage and Black food sovereignty. So, looking at the passed down recipes, the rituals of the kitchen, to politics of what's grown, preserved, and shared. And I felt called to celebrate diverse voices across the Black diaspora by one bullet point, creating an anthology of poetry and visual art. The next was facilitating cultural artistic cooking experiences, and then also holding courageous conversations with community. And at this point, I think I've mentioned Dutch pot quite frequently. I should have um, defined it. So, for those that don't know, a Dutch pot is a heavy, like very hefty cast iron cooking pot, but culturally, it's also a container for memory because in many Jamaican and Caribbean households, the Dutch pot is where everyday ingredients become something more communal because it's quite large. It holds the staple foods, like I mentioned, rice and peas before, or stew, curry, soup, dumplings, and all the kinds of meals that call people in to taste test them even before it's done. Because you can smell it because of all of the volume of the ingredients. And for me, the Dutch pot is important because it reflects how culture is passed down through doing, not always through written recipes, but through watching, tasting, adjusting, listening, and remembering. And the Dutch pot also shows how Caribbean people have carried knowledge across migration, scarcity, and substitution as well. And so, with that, it shows how I think it connects so strongly to collage because both are practices of gathering the fragments, trusting intuition, and allowing different materials and histories to come together into one living composition. Hi, Nala. So, this is the first of many future anthologies, which was made possible by Guild Festival Theater and the Black Youth Voices of Scarborough. So, Dutchpot in Diaspora is a vibrant anthology of poetry, visual art, and cultural storytelling that stirs the soul as deeply as it stirs the pot. So, this is rooted in language of food and the memory of kitchens. This collection brings together Black youth artists with connections to Scarborough to reimagine food sovereignty, ancestral recipes, and the ways that our meals carry resistance, love, and legacy. And it's inspired by the Dutch pot. And this vessel is known for holding flavors over generations. And I use a lot of food puns, so let me continue with that actually. And I would say this book simmers with creativity, and each page is a serving of art that honors the past and feeds the futures of creators and readers. And whether through like poetic reflections on market days, like going to the market in the Caribbean, or family reunions, or layered collages and paintings of mangoes in memory, these pieces ask, how do we reclaim our right to eat nourishing food that is also culturally representative of our identities? So, another prompt that I gave to folks submitting their works was, can a recipe hold the weight of a legacy, and can food be a form of protest? This project received so much love and interest with a poetry workshop that was offered, a collage workshop, and free anthology submission with paid features after being selected for print. We had international submissions and inquiries about what food sovereignty even means. So many interesting stories were shared, but with a dream and a deadline, I had to make very tough decisions of curating the stories. And I read my poems from it for the first time at Black August Arts Residency on Toronto Island last summer. I would share more, but if you want a copy, you can purchase it on my website. I won't spend too much time because there's something else that I wanted to share with you. So yes, the Black August Arts Residency. This residency, um, I kept the idea going from the anthology into this residency. And at Black August Arts Residency is where I met so many kind, creative, and powerful humans creating change in the world. So I spent time on Toronto Island being integrated in nature, not needing really to worry about time and move more into my natural circadian rhythm. And I got to expand physically. Look at the bottom left corner. That whole table, I think it was 8 feet, 8 feet by 3 feet. So it's quite large. And every morning I would sit at the table and slowly clip away. So I really got to expand physically. I also received some incredible teachings from Malika, the Moonrise poet, about indigeneity and being in right relation with the land. So you can see me harvesting some mint on the right there. I went on walking tours to learn about the histories and medicinal properties of plants, how to harvest by giving an offering and taking only what you need. I went on walks with my friends as well, Happy Micah and Slow Pitch Sound, to greet the land and harvest some plants, which were used in a tasting journey activation, which we offered to other residents at Black August. And as I mentioned earlier, at that massive table, each morning my routine was to wake up, to sit at the large empty table facing the sun that rose out of this huge window, quietly and slowly clipping away. I was spending about 3 to 4 hours each morning, well before my peers woke up because I'm the only early bird. And I would put images away after clipping to tidy it up. So I would do this process. I would spend 3, 4 hours in the morning, cut, tidy it up, go outside to nature, go on walks, connect with the land, and started to repeat and repeat. And I slowly stored my collage ingredients and became acquainted with each of them. And I started to see the dotted lines come up again randomly throughout the day when I would just focus on learning or cooking or being outside and finding moments of joy to go on adventures. I would then return to the empty table and be excited to start all over again. And being on Toronto Island, I found that being on island time and just enjoying the moment sparked so many ideas in a condensed amount of time, but I didn't feel as anxious as I usually would when it came to preparing for presentation. So as time got closer and closer to the open house, I dumped all the images onto the table, looked at them, and walked away. And I came back to check on them and see what they had to say. So when I went to sleep one night, I woke up and all of the dots suddenly connected, and I made 12 new collages that day. So my process here was stepping through the concepts of watching versus looking versus seeing. So watching is how I learned through proximity. So like watching my mom or grandma cook, watching how food brought people together, watching how materials behaved in my hands, just a simple act of noticing. Looking is where my artist brain begins to organize information, like noticing colors, textures, patterns, fragments, symbols, seeing what things are common. And then the seeing part is where the deeper transformation happens. And seeing is when I understand that an object is holding memory and that a material is carrying a story beyond its surface. So we know that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And what words are those? What sentences am I cutting and putting together? So collage asks me to move through all three of the watching, looking, and seeing. And so I watch the world, I look closely at what has been overlooked, and then I try to see what wants to be revealed when fragments are placed in relationship. So there's six, one, two, three, four, five images here, just a few from the series that I created and the stories that were woven together intuitively, much like how I'm I guess, not comfortable in seasoning without measure when I started. But with analog collage, the process is different than when you're cooking because once you glue something down, you can't unglue it. But when you're cooking, you can adjust around. So, like if something's salty, you could put potatoes, but I don't think we invented something to unglue paper yet. But I came to the realization that one, I can take up a lot of space as an artist, and I shouldn't feel the need to shrink myself to fit a container. But then a couple months later, I moved downtown where my square footage shrunk by 30%. But now I'm closer to the water. Um, and being close to water or nature is something that a lot of humans have been removed from. So I guess it's Gen Z slang of touching grass actually holds a lot of weight. So for those who aren't chronically online, touching grass means to log off, to go outside, and to reconnect with real life to get some perspective. And food brings so many people close together. Having it as an intentional gathering at the dinner table brings so much more depth to conversation. And I was fortunate growing up that my family had a conversation jar. So as teens, we got to write our questions on paper, fold them up, place them in a jar, and at dinner time, we would shake the jar and take out a question. There would be so much excitement because we never knew what was going to be picked, what we were going to talk about, how long the conversation would last. And it also helped us getting to learn more about each other as individuals and less as a family role. And conversations over food are so rich. And I'm grateful that these experiences have happened to lead me to where I am now and where I'm going. And so, what happened in March was this courageous conversation. In March, I was fortunate to host um, this cook along inaugural brunch where I invited close community to enjoy fresh Caribbean ingredients, an idea for recipes, conversation prompts during the brunch to talk more deeply about food sovereignty, as well as poetry prompts. So the whole 3.5 hour event was audio recorded, where afterwards the experience turned into a poetic soundscape for a 5 minute audible reflection, collaging the voices in conversation. And conversation was the main foundation of this project. It was important to provide some container to give the opportunity to learn more than what we could have learned on our own. But it's important to me that community feels that they can create at their own pace. So this means creating containers that feel invitational rather than demanding by centering inclusive design. So I had an event menu, conversation prompts, Mad Lib poetry prompts, a journal where people were invited to help with natural connecting or just sharing reflections. After all this was shared, we just hopped straight into the kitchen without a recipe. So recreating my experience from my childhood, but just giving some room to experiment and explore. Oh, one thing to note is like for context, the folks I invited all have some exposure to Caribbean food, with a handful being chefs or foodies themselves. So how is this an art practice? We don't see any tangible fine art. But while following along my story up to this point, art inspired conversation from childhood and presented itself in many forms. And so the community inspires the art making, but also facilitating connection through culinary arts as an art form itself. It's also very important to ask permission before transforming stories into artwork, to leave room for silence, to respect privacy, and to honor partial memories that were shared in the audio recordings before turning it into audio, a poetic audio soundscape. And so you can see here, I'm prepping some ingredients for one of the dishes. You can see in the bottom left that there's some food prompts or dinner prompts that were created, and the categories we had were food sovereignty and power. We also had uh, comical debates, which looked at the pronunciation of certain ingredients, like plantain versus plantain, based on where you're from. And then with laughter, we got to break the ice and then get into more serious conversations. And so now we're going to revisit this because I think we'll have enough time. So the question I'm posing to you is, how do recipes become archives? And how do archives become living sensory artworks in your way of life? So another way to think of this is what fragments, moments have shaped the way you see the world and build community. And feel free to share a recipe. It could be a group of the next things like an object, place, phrase, material, or memory. And I'll open the floor.
Thank you, Jasmine. This is certainly a lot of food for thought.
Nice fun.
I tried.
So
Um,
I actually have a funny story that this brings up to me, that was just revealed very recently. So my grandparents on my mother's side, my mother's parents ran a restaurant in downtown Toronto in the 1930s and 1940s that catered to the trade of people who were making clothes at the time. And my grandmother was known to be a very good cook. And my background is Jewish, and so we have a lot of cultural foods related to that. And we all knew her as a very good cook. Made many things. She was a good baker, etc. But so at one point, my aunt apparently had, and I just heard this recently through my aunt. My aunt had asked her about her recipe for her brownies that she made that we all loved. And she finally revealed that all she did was she went to the store and bought a brownie mix and made the brownies.
That's so funny. Yeah, I learned recently also that you can make boxed like cakes and things taste really good by subbing out what the recipe suggests. So for example, with cake, you can sub out water for milk, oil for melted butter, and you can add an extra egg to get it more fluffy. But no one would be the wiser as your story suggests, Nina.
So, and it looks like Leash says she has the same issue in that her grandmother did that with cookies that they thought were homemade for many years. So Jan is asking, what's coconut paper and how do you use it?
Oh yes, coconut paper is made from the husk of the coconut. Um, you can get it handmade or you can get it processed. And I'm trying to think. I'm not sure the Japanese paper place would have it in Toronto. You might have to look online, but you can use it for literally anything. You can use it to wrap things. You can use it in your paper-based practice. You can shred it up, turn it into a pulp to make paper sculptures. Um, Also, I guess because it's coconut, it also works really well for shredding into the soil for tropical plants to help with drainage. So there's a lot of uses for coconut paper.
So it's similar to rice paper and how it's used in certain cultures, right?
Yeah.
and is it a coarse paper? When you say coconut husk, I think of something that might be coarse or thick.
Yeah, it's sometimes it could be blended with like mulberry paper pulp
Hmm.
so that it balances out the roughness. Um, even with paper making, there's recipes there for it too and processes uh, to make the sheets. So it changes based on who the paper maker is. But
Mhm.
generally, yeah, coconut husk is rough. And there's the way to process it, which is a secret because I don't know how it works. But it it's it's really nice to incorporate coconut paper into my practice, especially being a Caribbean artist.
Does it smell like coconut?
No, unfortunately, it
Oh, that's
doesn't.
too bad.
Oh.
You could probably add some kind of chemical that would make it smell like coconut.
Hmm.
My one of my sort of recipes that I do regularly, and I have since I was, I guess, since I was an immigrant to Ontario from Nova Scotia. I would make this Ukrainian bread at Easter time, which is basically it's just bread that's kind of sweet and that rises. The first time I made it, I was told to make it in a coffee tin, you know, those big coffee tins. And the first time I made it, I used smaller coffee tins and they looked like phalluses, which was really funny. But I now make a kind of a braided one that's much easier to make and it's easier to deal with generally. But I guess it's, you know, my mother, never, I don't remember my mom ever making that, but she made other sort of traditional bread things, and she made all the modern things. She grew up in Alberta on a farm, and you know, she was Canadian, but her grandmother had immigrated to Canada, and her mother was born in Canada, but they had a lot of Ukrainian foods that they made.
Mm.
So bread was certainly an important one, and the whole Easter thing was a big deal. So I didn't have that really from my immediate family because we lived in Nova Scotia and there weren't very many Ukrainians there, as far as I knew. And so I found it in a cookbook and I just basically did it from that. And it's continued to be kind of a fun thing to do every year, you know, that I finally make something that nobody else makes and it somehow connects me to we also added things like the eggs that are done with wax. Um, and I invited my friends to make eggs sometimes when I was younger and things like that. But it was just it was, I don't know what it was. It was certainly part of my history, and history that I was making for myself as well.
Hmm. I love how you phrase that history that you're making for yourself. That's true. That's how family traditions start. Like someone has to start it and then you pass it down.
I also find it fascinating how these foods are so tied to where we live. You know, when we have so many cultures who have experienced various forms of diaspora, and how these, you know, these different cultures have spread around the world, and depending on where they have landed, how they've taken certain foods and adapted them because of where they live. Right. So, you know, recently, I was unaware, for example, of, you know, again, Jews in Jamaica, you know, who have rice and peas during a time when many other Jewish people in the diaspora around the world, you know, will not have rice. So it's incredible how we're so tied to the foods and where we live as well.
Hmm. And also another element that you mentioned was like the cultural communities existing in different spaces. And so, like, for example, an ingredient that's the national dish of Jamaica, actually, like ackee, it's a fruit that was brought from Ghana. And in Ghana, when you go, you'll see a lot of ackee trees, but most of the ackee, not all, most of the ackee falls to the ground because it wasn't established as a way of life to prepare it. However, with Jamaicans, like as a result of the slave trade, they had to adapt and find ways to use ackee to be nourishment. And for those that aren't aware, ackee, if not properly ripe, is toxic. It can cause stomach sickness. I forget the term that they use, but you'll just be not very well. So a lot of folks, um, possibly when they started trying to eat it or ingest it, they became sick and then turned away. But like with many foods, it takes some form of alchemy or knowing how to process something to turn it into something that you can use. And Aki is definitely one of those because I have a story where I almost poisoned my family because when I was young, I was a child, uh, just starting to live with my grandmother. She told me to go pick some ackee off the tree, but she didn't give me any other instructions. And as a child, I'm like, okay, that was the instruction. Now let's go do it. So I climbed to the tree, got the ackee. The ackee were in pods that were closed, but I knew that they were ackee because I seen them before. So I plucked them, peeled them, took them out, gave them to my grandmother. So she didn't know what it looked like when I harvested it, but she could tell just by looking. It's like, Jasmine, were these pods open? I'm like, yes, I opened it. She's like, no, no, no. Were these pods opened when you saw them on the tree? And then I said, no. Why? What happened? She's like, oh, well, I'm glad I caught that because I could have poisoned everybody.
Oh,
Yeah. And so with her knowledge, she was able to just look at the ingredient and see, okay, something's not right. But me just learning things I didn't understand. And so like with that exposure, now I know. And now I have a funny story which could have ended up not really funny. Um, but through that, now I can share that story for others to know what you should do when harvesting.
Sorry that I'm not on camera. I have technical issues with my computer, but I wanted to share a recipe as well. So I'm Alexandra. I love to travel. Last September, I went to Mexico City with my sister, and when I travel, I usually try and take a cooking class. So we did a cooking class at a Mexican home, and we made tacos. And while I was there, they had a recipe on the wall for a recipe for love, and it had things like respect and trust and those sort of things. So when I came back, I took a mixology class at George Brown, and we each made our own recipe. So I decided to make a cocktail recipe for love. So I thought about what that would entail. So I thought it should be smoky and hot and bittersweet. So I made my own chocolate sauce with dark chocolate. I used smoked paprika, paprika paste, vodka, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's a recipe that I came up with.
sounds fantastic.
Sounds
Thank you.
really good.
Did everyone love it?
Yeah, yeah. They had fun tasting it and trying the different ingredients.
That's so cool.
I love your prompts, and I think for many of us, cooking and thinking about recipe as collage, like, oh wow, you just set off a lot of ideas for me. Many years ago, I did a student internship in Haiti, and I ended up being placed in a family that spoke no English, and I spoke no French or Creole at the time. And I will never forget one of the early breakfasts. They handed me a mango. I had never seen a mango before. I didn't have a clue what was in my hands here or what I was to do to it with it. So a lot of pantomiming to figure out. And I did learn to love mangoes. And I did my sociology project there was learning to cook. I had grown up even from a 2-year-old helping cook and things. And like not only mangoes, what do you do with them? Was I was getting a little bit more of the language, and we were going to make pies, and they were going to make pies with onions. Again, I had never heard of this. And they asked me, well, what do you make pies from? And I said, well, apples and cherries. And they were aghast that you would desecrate an apple, and how could you possibly make a pie from cherries? Because that's a very different fruit in Haiti than what we think of as cherries. So I just, I haven't thought about Haiti in years or a long time. And I still have the recipe cards that were part of that sociology project. So thank you for prompting a creative thought process here again.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the places I've lived in, I really have to learn something about the cooking, and Mexico actually was one of the places I spent some time. But I actually learned about cooking more from the the servant who was living in the house um, than from any kind of class or anything, or even from going out to eat, because she showed me how she made tortillas in her hands, just going back and forth. And then she gave me a trick how I could make my own using plastic bag to push it down on to make it really thin. It was fascinating how you could learn how to do something like that that was so basic to their culture. And even here, we usually would just buy tortillas. We would try to make them ourselves.
I have a short story. We were traveling on Prince Edward Island with our kids who were, I don't know, 6 and 8. And we kept thinking we had to drive to the end of the island to one of the ferries to go to Nova Scotia. And we kept thinking, oh, there'll be somewhere to stop and eat. And there wasn't. There were no, Harvey's or
Food
Tim
places.
Hortons or anything. So finally we were staying in this cabin the night before and we still hadn't found food. And there was a little general store. So we went in and the only thing you could find, there was a bag of potatoes. So we got a bag of potatoes, a thing of milk and some butter. I said, our background's Irish. I said, well, we're recreating the food of our ancestors. This is what they ate all the time. So we made a big thing of it, but it was delicious. It was just kind of funny and everything else had cans and it was like a little efficiency cabinet. It didn't have a can opener. So they all survived.
So I just want to mention it is 1:57. Jasmine, if you still had something that you wanted to say to wrap up your presentation.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for sharing your stories. And I had this slide, like, if you're craving anything else from me, you can follow me on Instagram at articulately_Jasmine or contact me through my website, www.jasminevanstone.com for collabs and curious questions. And these are examples of other projects that I've worked on that aren't tied to food. And I just have a few other mediums that I didn't get to talk about, but I do murals, art workshops, graphic design. I do digital collage commissions, arts-based research, professional development for emerging artists and arts workers, project and event management, and more. So if you wanted to support me or collaborate, I'm always open to many ideas and opportunities. And thank you again for sharing your story with me and spending time with me for the last hour.
Well, thank you
Thank you.
so much, Jasmine.
Yeah.
We appreciate this so
Well,
much. You've sparked so many creative thoughts in my mind. And yeah, we're getting thank yous coming up here in the bottom too. Just for people to know, we're taking a break for the summer, so it will be the fall.